Started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Data Sharing and Data Availability to Improve Affordability Outcomes. We're very happy to have you all here. My name is Sarah Fitzpatrick. I'm a Technical and Policy Advisor at the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, and I'm the staff lead for the National Council on Electricity Policy, which is an initiative that NARUC administers. I'm going to go over a very quick introduction to NCEP, and then I'm going to pass it to our moderator and panelists to kick off our conversation today. So for those who are unfamiliar with the National Council on Electricity Policy, it is a collaborative forum that's funded by the Department of Energy, and it brings together state decision makers on cross-cutting electricity issues. This graphic on the left here represents our member groups. They include the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, or NARUC, the National Governors Association, or NGA, the National Association of Clean Air Agencies, or NACA, National Conference of State Legislatures, or NCSL, National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates, or NASUCA, and the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASIO. So these state decision makers all come together to talk about emerging electricity related issues and how new technologies, changing policies, regulations, and markets impact their states and the electricity system as a whole and how to deal with those changes. NCEP also provides an opportunity for the representatives in each of these member organizations to share knowledge, perspectives, and priorities around various electricity issues. We host events and we also prepare resources. So starting with our events, we host 4 webinars a year. 2 of them are our member updates. And those focus on allowing our member organizations to share the work that they've been doing over the year on electricity or energy related topics. We usually also have 2 topical webinars that we select over the years. This one, or over the year, this one is about affordability. We've had previous ones about transportation electrification as well. Our events culminate in our annual meeting, which is held usually every September. We just had our annual meeting this past September in Indianapolis, focused on affordability. And I will say it was a good time had by all. We had some excellent speakers and lots of discussion among our group that attended. In addition to our events, we produce resources, and our crown jewel is our mini guide series. And the mini guides are 12-page interview-based guides that highlight positive examples of collaboration between our member groups, as well as other industries and other organizations. I've included a list of our mini guides that we've published in the past here on the left. I'll note that we also have 2 in production that should be coming out early in 2024. One is on air and environmental regulator collaboration with utility commissions and state energy offices. And the second is collaborations between state government agencies and higher education institutions for workforce recruitment and retention. So I'll give one last plug for our website. I would encourage everyone to look at our resources and our events there. There's a lot packed into that website, and it's here on the second bullet. I'd also encourage those of you who are not a part of our listserv to sign up via the My NARUC account. The instructions are at the first bullet. And you can stay up to date on our goings on through that. And then a couple webinar reminders. We have a Q&A box. We're going to have some time at the end for audience questions. Please feel free to type your questions in at any point during the webinar, but we will save those till the end to answer them. And then finally, this webinar will be recorded and the slides will be posted, and you can find those at the NCEP website in a couple weeks. So that's all from me. I'd like to thank everyone once again for being here and thank our moderator and panelists for chiming into the conversation today and leading it. But with that, let me turn it over to our lovely moderator, Commissioner Sarah Freeman of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Take it away, Commissioner.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm so excited to learn from today's panelists. Joining us today are Dr. David Kaniski, Professor of Environmental Studies and Co-Director of the Energy Justice Lab at Indiana University. Go Hoosiers, my alma mater. Sanim Kaiser, Senior Manager of Analytics at O-Power, which is part of Oracle Energy and Water. And Sanim's a frequent and awesome NCEP collaborator. And Dr. Courtney Henderson is a clean energy strategist and consultant and an elected official in one of my favorite small towns, Truckee, California. Each of our panelists will give a 10-minute presentation on the work they're doing with utility and customer data, and then we'll move into some moderated Q&A. As Sarah said, if you think of questions you'd like our panelists to answer, please type them into the webinar Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end for David, Sanem, and Courtney to respond. So with that, David, will you go ahead and start us off?
I will. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the webinar, and thank you, Commissioner, for moderating us. Look forward to the conversation. I trust everybody can see my slides okay. Today I want to spend a few minutes telling you about a data project that we've been working on at the Energy Justice Lab for the last couple of years. It is an effort to collect and compile and make usable utility disconnections data from across the country. Let me first say something about the Energy Justice Lab, which I co-direct. This is an umbrella organization representing a very large research project that now spans 2 institutions, both Indiana University, and my co-director, Sonia Carley, is at the University of Pennsylvania. Broadly, what we're interested in doing is understanding the sort of the vulnerabilities that occur as a result of the clean energy transition. And one particular dimension of that is thinking about possibilities of higher energy costs, right? And particularly how that might affect people in their homes, particularly low-income customers. So in that area, we've been working over the last many years trying to explain the prevalence and patterns of energy insecurity, which we're simply defining as challenges in affording residential energy services, evaluating potential solutions to those problems, and then the part I'll talk about today, which is collecting and making accessible utility data on disconnections as well as related policies. So I think everyone knows the disconnection problem that we have in the United States. Through the efforts we've been undertaking, we have estimated that at least 3 million people each year have their electricity shut off as a result of an inability to pay a monthly energy bill. The data I'll be presenting today, you can find at a website called utilitydisconnections.org, where we make an effort to make this sort of just shine a light on this problem. So, I think everyone on this webinar knows, we rely on energy for both the simplest things like plugging in our devices these days for allowing our kids to excel in an increasingly connected school environment, keeping our food and medical equipment functioning, our food safe and our medical equipment functioning, as well as basic warmth and cooling, right? So obviously living without power, which happens when you lose access to utility, electricity, natural gas, something like that, is quite important. So what I want to do today is take you through a little bit of this effort we have done to create what we've called a utility disconnections dashboard. There are actually 3 different data tools that are part of the dashboard. There's a utility disconnections map, which I'll show you. That is simply a geographic representation, a spatial representation of utility disconnections across the country, at least where data are available. We have collected information on disconnection policies, and these would be policies that restrict the times when customers can be disconnected from their service. And then we have a separate data explorer tool, which is simply a different portal into some of the same disconnections information. Before I give you a tour, I wanted to at least give you a sense of how we did this and what data are incorporated into the dashboard. So we've been working very hard to compile disconnections data from mostly regulatory dockets, other disclosure requirements that come from utility commission, from PUC websites through a variety of web scraping and manual data entry. We have filed public information requests with municipal power providers. We've leaned heavily on a lot of partner organizations who provide us with contacts at the state level in particular. And we've done things like calculate disconnection rates, which is simply the total number of disconnections divided by the total number of customers. That's kind of on the disconnection side. On the policy side, we have spent a good amount of time sort of reading legislation, reading regulatory regulations to get a sense of what exactly protections are across the country. So we have at least some data on disconnections from 42 states plus the District of Columbia. Within those 42 states in DC, we have at least some data from over 330 utilities. In about 70% of these cases, we have at least 3 years of data. And in about 35% of the cases, we have 5 years of data. So one of the things we're hoping to do is show the patterns of disconnections over time. This is not complete. It represents about 80 million residential customers, but there's lots of gaps, and I'll talk more about those here in a few minutes. So let me just quickly show you the dashboard. Is the new screen showing up? Can someone give me confirmation?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I never know when I switch windows on the screen. So what you're looking at here is simply a map of the United States, obviously, looking at 2022 data across all months. And you see sort of light up on the map are the total number of disconnections in different states. Indiana right now is selected, so you can get a more detailed picture of what's happening in the state. On the right-hand side, where you have a breakdown for all the different utilities that are incorporated into the dashboard. We have both electric utilities as well as natural gas utilities. One could change to look at disconnection rates, which, as I mentioned before, is simply looking at the total number of disconnections divided by the total number of customers. We provide information at the bottom as to which utilities are covered in any given state. So you can learn a little bit more about the source of the data that we have, as well as the time range for any particular state. If I were to scroll down, what you'll see is we have lots of information about how we did all of this. You can sort of read a very long PDF if you'd like with our technical details of the project. But what I want to share most importantly is that you can download all the data, right? So we've made an effort to make all the information we've collected publicly accessible. So you can download data for a particular state. You can download data for the entire country. You can change which years you're looking in. If I were to sort of change it to a different year, you'd see the map changing in real time. So there's lots of information here for people to take advantage of. The second part of the dashboard I wanted to quickly highlight is the policy side. I mentioned that we've collected data on policies across the country. These are everything from seasonal moratoria on disconnections to particular protections for customer classes, maybe for the elderly, families with children, military veterans, or a whole slew of those that exist in different parts of the country. You can look at different weather-based protections, and the map will sort of give you a summary of how these protections vary across the country. One more thing to highlight here is that for every state, we have put together a profile, a PDF profile. Hopefully this opens up and you can see it as well. It is a narrative version of what's summarized on the data map itself, where it provides information about the protections that exist in any particular state. We're working hard to keep this up to date so that we can capture any changes in policy as they happen. Okay. So a few final thoughts here. There are some limitations to the dashboard. There are lots of places where utilities are not required to do any reporting. So obviously we don't have information about utilities in those states. In fact, most utilities across the country are not facing disclosure requirements. So there's a lot we don't know about the patterns of disconnections across states, across service territories, things of that nature. The reporting that does occur often lacks really high levels of geographic resolution. Often you provided sort of monthly totals for the entire service territory, and there's not information, let's say, of how there's variation within a service territory, let's say by census tract or zip code or some other lower level of geography. And then third, we still know very little about municipal and cooperative utilities. Most of the data that we've been able to find and to compile come from IOUs only. Second, we're interested in obviously in showing disconnection counts or disconnection rates, but this only tells a partial story, right? We still don't know who utilities disconnect, why some customers are disconnected and others not. We can't really infer from our data if disconnections are being used as a last resort or more as a routine collection strategy. So there are a lot of unanswered questions, which I hope today's webinar will help us begin to think about. And then as a final point, one thing that I think data can help us with, including the kind of data that we've collected and other work we've done at the Energy Justice Lab, is to get a more rich understanding of who is energy insecure, who is facing the potential risk of disconnections, and importantly, what we can do in advance to sort of intervene and to make reduce the prevalence and the probability of a disconnection. And the point I wanted to make here is that it's not just about income. We've learned through extensive survey research of low-income households that even controlling for income, people of color, families with young children, people who are medically vulnerable, people living in poor housing conditions are all much more likely to have challenges paying their energy bills, as well as facing higher rates or probabilities of disconnection. So it's not just about income, which has an important implication, which is that strategies that target energy assistance need to focus on more than just identifying low and moderate income customers. We need to identify and sort of focus our attention on some of these other characteristics as a way to really target our interventions to those customers who are most in need. So I think it kind of begs the question for all of us to think about is how might utilities better identify all the customers who may be in need of energy assistance? And I know my co-panelists have a lot of ideas to share on that topic. So I'll just leave you with this. Contact information is available if you want to learn more about our lab, more about our utility detections dashboard, and the other work that we're doing. Thanks.
Thank you so much for starting us off with this incredibly valuable work that you're doing at IU and with your partners at Penn as well. Next, we'll hear from Sanem Kaiser.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Freeman. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. And let's get started. So my name is Sanem Kaiser. I head up the analytics team at OPower, which uses behavioral science as well as AI and data to encourage customers to change their behaviors to increase energy efficiency. And today, what I really want to talk about is that data piece that underlies a lot of our work and how we can actually use that to identify low-income customers and get them connected to the programs that can help them pay their bills. So according to the US Census, over 60% of Americans could be considered low or moderate income. And so that's sort of represented by that light green square there, or circle there. So that full set of limited income customers is not directly observable. We will never know every single thing about every single customer to be able to sort of have a flag of 1 or 0 to say this person is low income and this person is not. But we do have tools at our disposal. So in that medium green circle on the left here, you're seeing that we can target based on existing demographic and previous enrollment information. So if a customer has historically applied to LIHEAP and received those payments, that's a good indicator to us that this customer is likely still in need of assistance and verified low income, and we should continue to reach out to them with renewing their LIHEAP payment or encouraging them to enroll in other income assistance programs. But that's only a small proportion of the broader set of limited income customers. So we look at this darker circle here. When we include other metrics beyond just previous enrollment, we can really slowly start to chip away at the customers that we're trying to identify here. So maybe there are customers that have never even heard of LIHEAP. Maybe there are customers that have heard of it, but haven't previously applied because they just don't think that they're eligible. Or maybe there are customers that are just barely above that threshold for eligibility, so they don't qualify for LIHEAP or these other income assistance programs, but are still not really easily paying their utility bills month after month. So how can we kind of combine all of the things that we know about a customer using a variety of different metrics to slowly start growing that circle to be able to identify those customers to the fullest extent possible? And that's not to say that utilities aren't doing anything today. I'm in the DC area, and so a lot of the local utilities here will get together in communities that they know are disadvantaged to be able to sign customers up, increase awareness of the different programs that are available. And that's a really effective mechanism for getting customers enrolled into these programs. But oftentimes what we've heard from utility partners are that these events are expensive and they only reach a small subsection of customers. And so while you can really reach customers with depth with these community-based events, what we can do is leverage technology to be able to sort of increase the scale using web-based solutions, using these different data analytics techniques to sort of supplement the in-person events that utilities are running today. And that starts with step number 1 here of identifying customers that are likely eligible for these programs. So at OPower, we have access to a wide variety of different data sets. So I sort of wanted to walk you through the data sets that we have access to that can be very similar for other utilities, as well as some of these state energy offices as well. So on the top left here, we're looking at utility data. So customer information directly from the utility in terms of monthly bills, collections data, customers that are in arrears, customers that are on discount rate codes. That's sort of the lowest hanging fruit for helping us identify customers that are in need of assistance based off of their previous billing activity. On the top right here, we're looking at customer provided data. So online audits are a very common tool that various states might run, or utilities might run, or different vendors might run, but we get data directly from the customer's mouths. So if they tell us that they are a renter versus an owner, that sort of unlocks eligibility into these renter specific programs to connect them to those programs that they could benefit from. On the bottom right here, we have third-party data. So sometimes that looks like third-party purchase data sets. So a lot of utilities will use credit data. We've actually seen that the customers that are missing entries in that credit data are actually largely concentrated in low-income communities. So there's a little bit of the puzzle piece approach of trying to get as much data as we can, knowing that nothing's going to be perfect. But data like that, supplemented by data from the US Census, as well as LIHEAP enrollment data from state energy offices, can slowly start to create that full picture of the customer to the extent that we can. And then finally, on the left here, all of that culminates into brand net new data sets that we can use based off of everything that we know already about a customer. So combining the monthly bills, as well as the income data, as well as census tract data, we could slowly but surely start to get a picture of household level energy burden using the direct bills that customers are receiving. And we can even use smart meter data to use usage disaggregation to be able to identify customers that have a higher heating load and therefore might be eligible and good candidates for weatherization programs or energy efficiency programs based off of their low profile to date. So that's all to say that there's no one metric to rule them all, which also makes it very difficult to identify customers like this. But slowly but surely, by piecing all of these together, we'll be able to get a more complete picture than if we were to otherwise just use one data set. And to sort of illustrate that, I wanted to show an example of the energy burden customers using, on the left side here, the Department of Energy's LEAD tool, the low-income energy affordability data that does offer the average household burden at the census tract level. And using this data set that's open source, you would be able to access it right now. We can identify hotspots already, census tracts where there are a high proportion of customers that have a high energy burden, even average across the census tract for the state of New York. But when we look at the right here, by using more household level granular metrics, combining all of these different resources, we'll be able to get even more granular. So we can identify customers that are outside of those incredibly burdened census tracts, be able to identify customers that have a high household level burden because we have their billing data, we have their income through these various sources to be able to assign one value per customer and identify customers that previously are kind of lost in the census tract data, different hotspots identified using that household level data. So step one is identifying. Step two is actually reaching these customers. And so we've developed an outbound solution, an email-based solution to really get customers connected to the products that the programs that they are eligible for and can benefit from based off of being identified as likely low income. So what you're seeing here is a mock-up of what we called our affordability alerts that are trying to do two things. Yes, increase education awareness of these programs and really getting encouraging customers to take the next step of learning more about these programs, but also really using behavioral science to sort of encouraging with soft norming to say this is an attainable program to enroll in. Your neighbors have done this, other people in your community have done this, and there is assistance available through your utility. And these outbound communications drive customers to the web. And you can think of this as sort of a one-stop shop where we've heard from customers it's very, very difficult to learn about all the different programs, determine which they're eligible for, which they're not eligible for, look at state resources, government resources, utility resources. So being able to collect everything into this one web-based one-stop shop really has seen sort of taken off that load from the customers and put it onto this one web-based solution. And so it starts with a couple of key questions to say, how many people live in your home? What is your household income to help determine using that eligibility matrix, what programs are eligible for, as well as asking about specific sort of dimensions that can determine customers are eligible for different programs. So if they've been served a collections notice recently, they might be eligible for a brand new set of programs that are a little bit more emergency based. And so once they answer those questions, they're served with a personalized list of recommended programs based off of their survey answers and what we already know about them. So it sort of takes away the load of having to search for these and kind of puts it into this one area that customers can focus on and spend the rest of their time actually gathering their materials, gathering the different documentation, and the things that they need to apply. And as an example here, the top recommended program, maybe this one specific customer answered the question that they are indeed at risk of entering shutoff. And so the top recommended program for that customer would be a crisis assistance program to help them as soon as possible with a payment dispatch to the utility. So I talked about the data that we have as OPower, but that's not to say that you need this golden tiered layer of access to everything to be able to really help connect customers to the programs that can assist them. So if we were to have just a web-based solution, having that survey at the very beginning really gets at the key 6 questions to determine program eligibility. And so there's a wealth of information and data collected from that survey alone to be able to sort of parse through all the noise and say, hey, customer, based off of your responses and the data that we collected in 2 minutes, here's the top recommended program for you. So having that one-stop shop is still very, very beneficial, even without that golden tier. With the addition of email addresses, you really start getting into the realm of being able to drive customers towards this solution. So that's something that the utilities have that state energy offices might not always have, but being able to have some outbound component can really increase the traffic and therefore more customers helped through that web-based one-stop shop. And then when we have the addition of mailing addresses, we can really start getting our targeting more honed in to customers that are living in disadvantaged communities. And then finally, that golden tier I told you about of combining all the data to really be able to get the full picture of customers and using household level targeting based off of everything that we know about them. So this is all to say that there's a lot of data that's available. There's a lot of different access points that are available as well. So I wanted to end on sort of this conversation that I have a lot of the time with the folks on our regulatory team of what is the intersection of technology and policy here. So these are some of the discussion points that we're always talking about, but I really want to point out 2 here. On the technology side, there are a variety of metrics from all these different sources that can identify customers that are in need today and those that are likely to enter based off of previous behavior, likely to enter into needing assistance tomorrow. So can we have a sort of central list of metrics that are adopted across all the utilities within a state or more broadly to be able to understand here are the dimensions that we want to be able to use to identify low-income customers, knowing that it's not going to be just one metric. On the policy side, one of the things that we've very frequently heard about is that data sharing is very difficult. I'm not going to pretend to be a data security person that knows and has figured out all the nuances of dealing with such important PII. But if we were to figure out that piece, getting data shared between the utilities, the states, would really go a long ways. For customers that, for example, apply to and receive SNAP benefits, they're automatically eligible for LIHEAP. So those customers, can we have a sort of data sharing program where instead of requiring them to apply to LIHEAP and SNAP, could all be streamlined into one process to be able to say, let's take away the load of submitting 2 applications, and based off of the combination, we can really get you enrolled in all the programs that you're eligible for in one go. So that's all I had for you all today. Very excited to continue to answer questions. I see a couple popping up. So back to you, Commissioner Freeman.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've been watching the questions coming in too. That's very exciting. Courtney, why don't you come on screen and close us out for this portion of the webinar?
Okay, thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you all today. I'm going to just give you a little bit of my background so that you have some context for where I'm entering this conversation. I spent a decade in public health and healthcare working all over the US, in Western Africa, and Northern India before moving into the clean energy industry another decade ago. The critical theme throughout my career has always been improving access to critical services, especially for our most underserved customers, constituents, and communities. And as the commissioner mentioned, I'm also an elected official. I serve on city council and finished a mayoral term just last year. When the neighborhood team reached out, they asked that I bring a lens to this conversation about humanizing our data. And so I'm going to talk a bit about qualitative data to do just that as we work to drive the affordability outcomes we're trying to achieve. And this is really important given some of the points that have already been made, like how disconnection rates tell us a portion of the story, but not all of it. And then finally, I'm also just going to talk a little bit about some of the models and lessons that we can leverage from healthcare and public health for the work that we do in energy. Next slide, please. Okay, so why does this actually matter to us? Why is it important that we humanize data? And there are a lot of reasons. So it's hard to use meter data to improve programs because it's often a lagging indicator. It tells us what happened in the past, and that's great for that retroactive view, but not when we're trying to bring data-informed insights into design, deployment, and continuous improvement of our programs and solutions. There are a lot of other leading indicators and data that we can use to provide that fast feedback, those earlier insights as we're in the midst of design, implementation, and assessments of whether we're driving the outcomes that we actually want amongst our customers. So I'm going to highlight a few, but you also have access to the chat. And so throw in the chat any other types of data that you're collecting about your customers, because we're all here to learn from one another after all. So a few that I think of a lot and and collect quite a lot: metrics like customer awareness, perceptions, specific behaviors, willingness to take action. We can use things like click-through rates, eye tracking studies, participation rates, and many, many more. And again, these can just really help us advance that model of continuous improvement and iteration that will lead to those stronger outcomes. Robust quantitative data combined with this sort of customer-centric lens and qualitative data is really, really powerful. And I would say that, I have certainly seen a bias towards quantitative data. And I argue that qualitative data is just as robust when designed and measured appropriately. And when we link the two together, that's when we really get our strongest insights, as Sinem just mentioned. Next slide, please. Thank you. So more often than not, we really want to jump into the design of a program, right? Or a service or a solution, and we focus on those data insights as part of formal evaluation. And perhaps sometimes less so in informing the continuum and evolution of our programs. And this is really where we should start. We can leverage models, for example, from public health to inform the work that we do in energy. So this here is a version of something called the social ecological model. And basically what it shows is that there are a lot of influences on people's behaviors at varying levels. And ultimately what we're trying to do is very similar to what we do in public health. We're trying to change behavior, right? Enroll in a program, take advantage of a certain solution that we're offering. It's really important that we spend that time up front to identify, who the audience is that we actually want to reach using, a lot of the techniques that have just been discussed. And then focusing on what's the behavior we're trying to change. What do our customers already think, have, know, and how do things at these different levels impact their lives, their daily lives, constraints that they may face, or things that actually promote the desired behavior change. Just like us, our customers do not live in a vacuum. They're influenced by so many factors throughout their lives and throughout their day-to-day, right? Their workplaces, their family, cultural norms and practices, neighborhood norms, things like that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this really just shows sort of another example of, if we have a current behavior and we can actually measure what our customers think, what they have, what they do, sort of where they are, and then we're trying to move them to that target behavior. Let's just say it's enrolling in a specific program. Our programs are, really best designed and actually achieve the outcomes we want when we either, change what people do by addressing barriers in terms of what they have, think, or know, or by actually changing some of those contexts that I've just mentioned, the environment, infrastructure, application processes, things like that. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a quote that I absolutely love. I had to share it. It's make sure you're building the right it before you build it right. This term was originally coined by Albert Savoya. He was an engineering director at Google many years ago. And I think this is really relevant because we often spend, we spend a lot of time, money, and resources sort of building it right, often without knowing if the right it is being built, because we don't always take enough time up front to really gather and understand what the data can truly tell us about what our customers need. All of those additional pieces, what are their barriers? What are their pain points? What does it actually feel like to put yourself in a customer's shoes and go through that application process? That's really, really important because some of them can be very, very cumbersome and challenging for customers. Okay, next slide, please. So this quote is really relevant when we think about prototyping and prototyping different types of solutions to drive those affordability outcomes for our customers. We talk a lot about prototyping. I think probably everyone has heard of that word before. We don't talk as much about prototyping. And it's really important because the reality is that the odds are stacked against us. A lot of new products, a lot of new services do fail. Failure is an unavoidable part of our innovation process within the energy industry and within any industry. So that's where prototyping comes in. It's something that you can do really quickly and cheaply to make sure you are building the right it, if you will, before you actually build it right. You would do things like deciding on key features. For example, key features of a new application process. Mock those up. Use some mock-ups to test and collect really rapid feedback, from your customers. Usage from your customers. Are they still hitting barriers during that application point? Okay, let's figure that out before we roll out a whole new application. Next slide, please. Another quote for you. I think this one's also really relevant. Don't find customers for your products, find products for your customers. The takeaway here is that we really have to use some of these different data collection methods and data insights like prototyping, some of these sort of human-centric approaches to gain that earlier data-driven insight from our customers. We can use things like prototyping as one example because it allows you to fail. And then you fail fast, you recover, and you redesign as needed to actually get the outcomes that you want amongst your customer base. Next slide, please. And actually, we'll go right to the next one. I'm just going to give a few examples of how we can actually do this and what it looks like. And like I mentioned, the NARUC team was interested in some examples from other fields and how we can apply those. So I'm going to give you one right up front. So this one is from the healthcare field. And I mentioned I come out of that background, and it's one of my absolute favorite examples. So MRI machines, traditionally confined, dark spaces, they're really, really loud. And I'm sure if you have been in an MRI machine before, you probably didn't love your experience of it. It creates anxiety for a lot of folks. It can feel very claustrophobic. So for a lot of folks, that's not a really fun or satisfactory experience. So now think about what you've experienced in an MRI, and now imagine what that experience would look and feel like for a pediatric patient. So this leads us to a challenge that a GE designer took on. They found that a high percentage of pediatric patients were really scared to go into these machines, and it was resulting in poor health outcomes, having to be sedated. And then of course there are risks with general anesthesia, having to reschedule entirely because many times an anesthesiologist simply wasn't available. So parents would have to take their kids home, reschedule, try again another day, obviously constraints on families. So the GE team came in and they started collecting data, putting it sort of right in the heart of what they were basically trying to get people to do, which was to have an MRI. So they observed kids in daycare facilities. They interviewed and surveyed patients as they came in for MRIs. They did data collection with doctors and staff. And based on all of this data collection, a lot of which was qualitative, they redesigned the entire pediatric MRI experience. Next slide, please. So this is what they ended up designing. They opened up the technology so it wasn't dark and scary for kids. They turned a procedure into a really fun experience. So here they created the Pirate Ship Adventure series. The entire room was redone in colors and themes to get kids excited. They designed the hallway space leading into the room. They scripted the experience. So kids were told that, for example, when it started to get loud, it was the booming roar of cannon from the pirate ship. And at the end of their MRI, kids get to pick a treasure from the treasure box. The result was phenomenal. Patient satisfaction scores went up 90%. The need for anesthesiologists declined significantly, meaning more patients could actually be scanned each day, which has economic impacts for the health facility. Families didn't have to deal with rescheduling and coming back. So just imagine for a moment, what would an empathetic design thinking approach like this look like in energy for your customers and for those whom you're trying to achieve these different affordability outcomes. Next slide, please. Okay, I wanted to give just a couple other examples of where we've used data successfully and maybe where we haven't. So a public health intervention aims to reduce malaria illness through the deployment of insecticide-treated bed nets. If we were all in person together, I would ask you, why did this fail? And maybe if you have thoughts, you can go ahead and throw them in the chat really quickly. So why might something like this actually fail? I'm going to give everyone 30 seconds. Somebody has to put something in the chat for me. Okay, as you all are typing, let's go to the next slide. And this particular intervention failed because they used them for fishing. Feeding their families was more important than putting a net over your bed at night to protect against malaria, which is something you cannot see from an insect. So these researchers, at least initially, did not go in and do that actual on-the-ground research with their customers to understand what their customers' biggest needs are. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's another one. A Muni in the Sierra Nevada mountains decides to deploy a residential heat pump adoption program to advance their electrification goals. Their fall timing is delayed, so they decide to roll the pilot out in December. Again, why might this fail? Next slide, please. Because we have the reality of rural mountain living. This is me in Lake Tahoe. Last winter, we received about 800 inches of snow. It was one of the biggest winters on the historical record. So it's really important that we're, collecting data, listening to our customers, understanding the influences on their behaviors at those varying levels of the social ecological model. So here you can see environment is obviously a huge one. Next slide, please. Okay. So I just have 2 slides left, and I want to talk a little bit about some real world strategies that have worked and, some of the things that makes our data, and especially when we layer that robust quant and qual data together, what do we actually get to? Ultimately, we're asking people to elect to do something, and changing behaviors is very, very hard. And we're asking them to do something where, sometimes they don't see, understand, or feel that immediate value. So how do we actually demonstrate that value? Well, we do it by knowing our customers through all of these data insights that we're able to gather, by empathizing with our customers, by providing that frictionless, high quality experience. As Sinem mentioned, that application process, why can't we put that together so that it's actually easy for customers? It has to be easy. It has to be convenient. It has to be accessible. I mean, those are just some of the basic expectations that our customers have of us. And so providing those experiences, in that way is really fundamental to getting participation in programs. So my parting thought for you is to, and next slide, please, is to work with your customers and don't work against them. And the next slide just has my contact information. If you have any questions following the webinar, I'm always happy to chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All of you, thank you for those great presentations. We've got about 15 minutes left, and rather than starting with my questions, I have one that overlaps with one of our audience Q&A dealing with customer privacy, for example. And the one in the Q&A says, is the data the utilities provide you anonymized or aggregated in any way to protect customer privacy? And if so, what protections are given? And I want you to think about that a little bit, but then also just about how do we encourage customers to participate in whoever it is, in sharing the data? When there is reluctance, how do you communicate what protections are in place? And then in the same way, I know there was another audience Q question out there about getting customers to participate when they might be afraid something is related to scams or phishing. So let's think about our customers and why reasons they might be wary to participate in various things, and how we can reassure everybody that their data is safe and being used responsibly. Maybe Sanim, could you kick us off with that one?
Sure, yeah, I think it really depends. I guess one question is, what is the use case for that? So there's the customer flow where more personalized information is more likely to get customers actually believing in the data and really understanding that this is just it's not a generic mailer. It's not a generic sort of like everyone's eligible for this thing. This is sort of based off of the responses, and trying to encourage data privacy in that way is a little bit different than more general reporting, which is equally important, but sort of has an aggregation feature to it. So I think we talk about data privacy and recognizing that it is very sensitive information. It's sort of the granularity. So in these customer facing experiences, I think it makes sense to have customer level data because the customer is the only one that can see that in that moment. But when it comes to the reporting side of things, I know, David, you were talking about this as well, of state level versus census tract level. Where is the right level of reporting that we have to be able to protect customers' information in the reporting scheme, but still have it as granular as possible to really balance the sort of the usefulness of it and the granularity of it, recognizing the privacy aspect of it as well.
Thanks. Anybody else want to chime in there? And it's okay if you don't. We have plenty of other questions to get through. David?
Yeah, I might just quickly, I think I really appreciate the question. There's a surveying that's been done around companies for many decades, and electric utilities are among some of the least trusted institutions in the United States, right? And I think customers enter into these conversations with a lot of skepticism, right? Doesn't mean that it can't be overcome, but I think it really means you have to, I think this is what Courtney was getting at in her presentation, is like really value the input and the needs of the customers, put those first, and then try to rebuild those relationships so that people are more willing to share data if they can connect it to a positive outcome, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done here, and I think data privacy is one thing people worry about, but I think I think it's part of a broader skepticism that people have about not just utilities, but how their information is being used and for what purpose, right? So I think rebuilding relationships is a good start, and there are many different ways that could be accomplished.
And Commissioner, I'll just add in very, very quickly. I think that you really hit on it. It's the trust aspect, right? And how do we get our customers to trust us? And so much of that is in our communications. And, Sanem, you started to talk about some of the different types of communications and being able to personalize those and giving people, information and solutions when they need them helps to build that trust, right? It doesn't help someone if you say, oh, we could have helped you, but you didn't come to us early enough. I think also, just my background as a behavioral scientist, our words, our language matters so much in all of the different types of communications, whether it's an interaction with a CSR, whether it's an email communication, thinking about sort of marketing, education, outreach type work. What are you pushing out to customers? And then what are you able to pull back? If you're sending something out, does it have a lot of legalese in it? I've certainly seen a lot of that. Customers aren't going to respond to that. It doesn't feel like something they can trust. Use their words, use their language. So that's just one little piece of that.
Thanks. You guys use a lot of phrases that, speaking of usage and words, that are music to regulators' ears. We hear things that we trust in the process, right? Data driven. We love hearing about continuous improvement and iterative processes. There's a security that that those provide, but sometimes data can fail us, or at the very least, the outcomes aren't what you might have expected based on your hypothesis going into whatever it was you were doing. Can you talk a little bit about what you learn in those situations, and then how you use those lessons for that continuous improvement going forward? Courtney,
I'll kick us off for this one. Sure. I think that, so one, I think folks probably gathered this from when I was talking, but I really embrace a fail fast or fail forward mentality, right? We are going to fail. That is part of the work that we do. And the more easily we accept that, the more easily we can integrate all of those learnings into future program designs, future program iterations. So I'll just give, one example of a IOU that I was working with, and it was a formal evaluation, so multi-year portfolio evaluation. But they also said, there's a lot of stuff that we don't really know about our customers that we're not going to get, we're not going to get it in an impact evaluation, certainly. Maybe we'll get pieces of it in a process evaluation, but we're just stuck. We're not seeing the applications coming in our pipeline for this program that we really want to see. And why is that? And so we sort of all aligned, and it took some time, right? Stakeholder development and engagement to align around, what do you think the customer journey for this program actually looks like? And now let's go do some quick hit customer journey mapping research to find out where those barriers and pain points actually are, right? Didn't talk to a ton of customers. It doesn't have to be a 6-month research study. Again, it can go out and do some really fast, sort of rapid feedback work. And we learned so much in that. And then we were able to say, okay, this is why we're not getting the applications. Like, they're coming in, but they're getting stuck at this part of the pipeline, right? So now we can retool for that part of the pipeline, actually developed a web-based tool, and oh wow, our pipeline sort of fulfillment went way, way up. So I think being able to, do things like that, and again, that's just one quick example.
David or Sinem?
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts I had is also very similar to one of the questions here in terms of access to digital channels. So I think one of the things that we always try to focus on is reaching customers in the channels that they can be reached through, and also that they want to be reached through. And so we've typically heard that low and moderate income customers are less digitally engaged. Maybe they have lower email coverage as a whole in terms of utility actually being able to talk to them through an email or SMS solution. So when we launched this digital based website with the email outbound component, we were encouraged, and the customers that we had spoken to that said that they have emails and that they would like to be reached through those channels, but we didn't necessarily know until we launched as a pilot to be able to understand whether we were reaching these customers at scale. And so once we launched the solution, we were actually able to see that of the customers that we reached, their open rates for these communications were at the same level as customers that are not LMI. Their click-through rates were significantly higher because it's always about connecting the message and the contents to the customers and really making it known what the call to action actually is. And then actually seeing them engage with the survey component and click apply now to be redirected to the programs that they were eligible for. We saw that yield, that sort of customer journey funnel, very, very healthy. And so when we see that web-based solutions are actually a good channel for low and moderate income customers, that also has the sort of other side of those customers that don't have emails on file, the community-based events, paper-based solution, that's still a really good channel for them because we want to reach customers however we can in the channels that they want to be spoken to. Sort of having the complementary solutions there, I think, was an important learning for us.
Great, thank you. David, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there, and if not, I have a question I'd like to at least ask you to start out answering. Is that okay? This came in through the Q&A, and the question online says, how can you coordinate the data to be the same? There's a lot of legacy methods that would require lots of money, which would most likely not be approved by PUCs. I'm tossing that one to you because I noticed in your dashboard presentation, you mentioned manual entry, which indicates to me there's a lack of standardization. And in all of you addressing this question too, it makes me think of, well, on the PUC approval side, sometimes when utilities want to get something approved and try it out at a lower cost, they'll propose pilot programs. But given the maturity of using data in these situations, are those really necessary anymore? So it's a multi-part question, my favorite, harder for you guys, of course, but fill in whatever blanks you'd like to.
Yeah, well, let me start with the first question.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll defer to others on the second. You're probably better situated to answer that. I'll give you a little time to think about it. So we have certainly encountered a tremendous amount of variation in how data is reported, right? It's variable certainly across utilities, but also certainly across states, right? So, one of the, I think, public goods part that we've sort of generated is making the data commensurate across different utilities and across space. It's very challenging. You can automate some of that. We try to do that when we can, but there's some cases where manual data entry and human eyes are just absolutely necessary to make sense of what you're looking at. So I would certainly encourage at the state level for commissions, at the federal level for the EIA and others. And I will use my megaphone to say this as loud as I can, right, to require standardized reporting and have it be as uniform as possible. I think utilities will learn from themselves. I think other stakeholders will learn best this way when they can make sense of the data and access it in a way that's consistent across sort of space and time. So absolutely critical. There are some states that have great reporting requirements that utilities are able to comply with, others less so, right? So I think learning from best practices would be quite helpful.
Thank you, Julia Friedman, for your comment there. Amen to data standardization. And I'll go ahead and say this applies not to just this type of data, but making sure it's in a non-static format. So staffers don't have to spend all of their time, again, re-entering something that could just be imported directly is really, really useful and keeps decision makers more content than usual. Sanem or Courtney on maybe the pilot program, larger program aspect of stuff when it comes to these things cost money and have to be approved.
Sanem, is it okay if I jump in? Okay. I mean, I would say, yes, I absolutely agree with David related to data standardization. And I also acknowledge it is very, very hard. And I have certainly, I've worked with teams building out, other types of dashboards where there is a lot of manual data manipulation. You're going into filings and prior evaluation reports, utility budgets, looking at savings. I mean, that is very, very time and labor intensive for everyone within our industry. I'll give just sort of a, I guess a snippet, if you will, from healthcare. I mean, the healthcare system has done tremendous work when it comes to data sharing and overcoming a lot of those PII concerns. So, I can go to a medical provider in California. I live right in Lake Tahoe. I can easily go over the border into Nevada to Reno to a healthcare provider, and they all have my medical records. And that's pretty amazing, isn't it? So I do think there are, I'm not a data security specialist either, Sanem, so I'm not going to go into details around that, but I do think there are other places and models that we can look to take some of those best practices. We don't have to reinvent everything within our own industry. I'll just leave it at that, because I know we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, Sanem, why don't you give the final response to that? I want to thank you all before she does that. And then when she's finished, Sarah Fitzpatrick, I'll let you close things out for us.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I'll just say is similar to what we were talking about the customer level. Why should you provide your information? And here are the sort of benefits that you have. I think it's very much at the utility level as well. Why should you be required to report on these things? And here are the things that we're going to do with that data. Here are the ways that we're going to help your territories, your customers based off of all that. So it's always about what is the sort of process to get to the outcomes that we care about, that we all share that same goal, and what's sort of the steps to get there.
Great. Thank you, Sanem. Thank you to all of our panelists and our moderator for closing out our programming for 2023 with a bang. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everybody attending the webinar today did as well. And thanks to all of our participants for sitting in today. With that, I'll close us out, and please, everybody, take care. Thanks again.